You're listening to the Doctor Is In podcast. This is the show where you get the best tips, tricks, and nutritional hacks to help you and your family get healthier. You'll also hear what works and what doesn't work so you don't have to waste your time and money. All right, let's get started.
Hello, I'm Dr. Martin Jr.
And I'm Dr. Martin Sr.
And this is the Doctors In podcast, and this is episode 147. Today we want to talk a little bit more about depression. Now, if you go back, I can't remember how many podcasts ago, but it was a while ago, we talked a lot about brain inflammation and the effect that it has on depression. We get a lot of questions and a lot of emails about depression, and what we want to do today is talk about some of the most common external causes of depression. And we'll kind of go through them, look at what the research is saying, and then also, again, a couple of tips that you can use right now to help with depression. And then you have a couple of cool stories as well of patients. So let's talk about depression. Again, how common is it in your clinic now?
Well, it's incredible, right? I mean, you see what we do in the office, too, and it's part of our biomarkers. And the big thing, I actually had a patient that wanted to fill out the biomarker, wanted to do a biomarker testing, but said, Dr. Martin, I don't want to fill out the questionnaire. And I said, well, look, if you want traditional medicine, then there's no questionnaire involved because they're just going to give you lab work. They're going to give you numbers, right? But what functional medicine is, it's the blending, it's the marriage of the lab and the patient, right? Like, what are you feeling? What are you doing? What are your symptoms? Because, you've always said this, that every condition has a story. Well, right? Yeah, you can always reverse engineer and bring it back, right?
Well, it's interesting that, traditional blood testing, when you go to a lab and get a whole bunch of tests, there's, like you said, there's a little bit of, well, really, there isn't. If your doctor sends you, there's, they'll take in Canada here, especially in Ontario, they'll get your OHIP card, a couple little questions here and there, and that's about it. So their results are 100% data, right? Data. And they have a set range that's been predetermined. And what's interesting is that depending on what lab you go to, that range may change a little bit. But if you fall within that range, you're normal. If you fall outside of that range, you're abnormal. And a lot of people don't feel well, and obviously their blood tests come back normal because they could really care less about how you feel. It's just the data, that's it. If the numbers say you're fine, you're fine. Whereas, as you mentioned, functional medicine is different. We weigh what somebody says. If somebody comes in, we listen to their story, and we place that over anything else.
Well, it trumps it, right? It trumps the lab.
It does. If somebody says they're fatigued, they're fatigued. Yeah. And that's their symptom. Now, traditional blood testing when it comes to fatigue is useless unless they have anemia or B12 level shows up low. And, or if they're diabetic or if they're fasting, there's a few little things that might explain but if the average person just says, hey, I've been tired for the last 3 weeks, blood testing is going to show, for most part, pretty much nothing. Yet the person still doesn't feel well. They feel fatigued. Whereas, and as you mentioned, so we're a symptom-based. We wrote a newsletter about this a while ago. We really practice more the art of medicine rather than the science of medicine. Yeah. We listen and we take everything to account, and that's so important.
Well, your grandfather used to say, right, and my dad, listen to your patient, they have inside information. And, a real important part of a functional medicine, what we do at the Martin Clinic, and I'm not saying we pride ourselves in doing that, but I always listen. I'm listening to my patient because they give me clues. There's always clues, right?
Well, what was that last study that just came out? It made news in Canada where in the average doctor's visit, the patient is interrupted within 8 seconds. Was it 8 seconds?
Somewhere
I know it was insane.
It was insanely quick.
So they're interrupted very quickly because
the doctor's busy. He's usually got his back turned to you.
Well, we had a lot of friends who are physicians.
Yeah, and they're good.
And they are, but they're busy. Yeah. Right? They really don't have the way that they structure their clinic and the way that we're set up here in Ontario, and I'm sure it's like this across Canada. The way that they're set up is that they just cannot spend any amount of time. There's no time really to listen to the story, so they get right to the symptoms. How are you feeling? What's your biggest complaint? It's this. All right, here's a blood test for it. Let's go get that done, and then we'll go from there. And if the blood test comes back normal, they're just like, all right, let's see how it feels. It's funny, right? Because I used to treat for a long time sports injuries, and I used to kind of chuckle inside because somebody would come in and they would say, yeah, I hurt my knee before, and I went to see my doctor, and my doctor said, okay, well, let's just, not much I could do, but let's just pay attention to it and see how it does. And then I never go back. So they would just assume that everything's better, right? And the reality is, unless you actually treat something, most things, well, a lot of injuries are self-limiting. They will go away. It's those ones that kind of nag a little bit. But the reality is, that's just how medicine works. You go in, you say your biggest complaint. You may have a few seconds to kind of explain what's going on. They'll run some tests. If the tests are abnormal, that's usually not a good thing because it usually means you're heading down that disease path very quickly because their testing is designed for disease. And if nothing comes back, then it's like, well, it's just moderate. See how you feel. Come back in a few months if you're still – because what they're hoping eventually something shows up on the blood test. But by the time it shows up on the blood tests, that's not good news. Yeah. So if you're not feeling well and nothing's showing up on the disease testing, that's good. You have time to kind of figure out what's going on. Whereas, as you mentioned, you're a symptom-based. So if somebody comes to see you and they're fatigued, well, you want their story, you want to dig into it, figure out why they're fatigued, and then run your biomarker test. And this is what's interesting, because you've said this before, biomarker testing will not trump what they tell you. You're going to listen to what they're saying. And I remember, as you mentioned, I remember your dad, my grandfather, talking about listening to patients and just, they'll tell you what's going on. A lot of times they know what's going on, they just don't know how to say it properly. And they'll tell you what's going on. And by the time they're done, it's going to be almost a textbook. It's going to be a textbook. Yeah. They'll tell you it. They may describe it differently than what the textbooks are saying, but they're going to get around to telling you what's going on with them. So it's always fascinating to hear people explain what's going on and then getting to the root of what the cause is. But anyways, when it comes to depression, a lot of times, and the frustrating thing with depression, especially the current treatment for depression, is medication. Because blood testing, for the most part, is normal.
Well, they're looking at the wrong tests, eh?
Yes.
And part of it, most of it is because they're not even looking at what what causes depression.
Let's spend the rest of this time then going through some of the external causes of depression. Each of these things has been linked in research to depression. And each of these things are treatable outside of medications, right?
Because, the medications, you've used that analogy before. You're driving down the highway, you hear a knock in your engine, and let's turn the radio up. Because antidepressants are not made to fix depression. They're not. They were made, actually, especially, when they originally, if you look at Pfizer and some of the things that they've come out with, well, the reason you're having trouble with antidepressants, they say, all the side effects, because they were never meant to take long term. Their studies were very short term. And that's the way they were supposed to be prescribed. But then, of course, they realized that, you go back 20, 25, 30. Some people have been on antidepressants
long time.
For 30 years.
I was always
they can't even sleep without an antidepressant.
No. And one of the things that's for the better today is that there's not really a stigma around depression anymore, right? I mean, it's
celebrated to some extent.
Well,
right?
To some extent now. What we want to do now is basically let's look at some of the external factors that once these things are fixed can definitely improve.
Well, make a huge difference.
Yeah. All right. So here's a big cause of depression that a lot of people don't realize: zero sunlight.
Yeah.
Getting no sun whatsoever.
Yeah.
If you're under fluorescent lights all day, fake lights all day, and you're not getting any sunlight ever, that does something to the brain.
Well, we know that even.
Well, vitamin D in the brain, we know that. Severe depression has been linked to chronically low levels of vitamin D.
And you see, the thing is with vitamin D, think of what it does, right? I mean, just physiologically, what does vitamin D do? Well, vitamin D, first of all, elevates your melatonin, right? Melatonin's a very, very important hormone. People don't realize that melatonin is something your body makes. But it does not make melatonin in the absence of sunlight. So the sun, of course, They've made it such a boogeyman, the sun. And people that get skin cancer, I was mentioning this not a while back on Facebook Live. People that get skin cancer, just a fact. Here's a fact. If people that work indoors, they're not people that work outdoors. It's not people that get skin cancer, especially the deadly melanoma.
No, it's the office worker.
Yeah, it's the office worker. That's why you're seeing so much melanoma today and so much basal cell carcinoma, because these things, yes, they're on rapid rise. The sun hasn't changed, folks. The use of sunscreen has. But anyway, I don't want to go there so much.
No, because that's
a whole other thing. But all I'm saying is that if you look at two things that vitamin D do, I mean, vitamin D does a lot of things. But one thing we know, melatonin, okay? So think of, you're not even getting a good sleep. Don't you think that could lead to depression if you're not getting into a good REM sleep? So in the absence of sunlight, in the absence of vitamin D, you're not making melatonin. Now, the second thing is, and this is one of the factors in vitamin D, and this is why I tell people, look, why do you feel so good in the sun? It is one of the greatest anti-inflammatories that you can take is the sunlight. You know what? The sun is an anti-inflammatory. The vitamin D is an anti-inflammatory. This is one of the ways it works inside the body. So when you're taking vitamin D as a supplement, and preferably you're getting it in the sun, I say, look, we live in Northern Ontario. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, vitamin D supplements in the north is just absolutely one of those things you have to do.
And I always tell my Florida friends that never go outside, it's unbelievable. They tell me, well, like my neighbors down in Florida, for 16 weeks in the summer, it's too hot. So they don't go outside. They live in air conditioning all the time.
And that's a funny thing. So we need a supplement in the winter. They need a supplement in the summer, which sounds funny to say that, right? But that's the reality.
It's too hot for them.
Yeah. I mean, I was away not too long ago, and I was talking to some people that live down in the south, and they're just like, they live in air conditioning. They play tennis indoors. Everything's indoors because it's so hot. Yeah. And I mean, that's understandable. But again, if they went and got their blood D levels checked, they would be low, guaranteed.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Well, how many people are low?
Well, not
right,
8.
Vitamin D.
Again,
what is the link with depression?
Well, right? and that's why study after study shows that chronically low levels of vitamin D, there's a strong correlation to. Well, first of all, we know what it does for dementia. We know what it does for Alzheimer's, and we know what it does for depression. Right. So sunlight, which again, we already know this because there's a seasonal, there's a SAD disorder, right? Yeah. People do.
They actually label it.
They actually label it. So zero sunlight. If you're indoors, and unfortunately, we live in a time where we work indoors. Mm-hmm. We work at a computer. It's blue light all day. We should do a podcast one time on blue light because the effect that it has on the brain and all that stuff. But I mean, we work under fluorescent lights. We sit in front of a blue light screen. We look at blue light tablets at nighttime in our room. Before bed, we look at our phones. Make no mistake, that has a massive effect on our brain. And again, it's like we talk about this when it comes to, for example, high circulating insulin. For some people that have high circulating insulin, they're going to have obesity. For other people, they won't have obesity, but they may have heart disease. For other people, they may not have that. They may have dementia.
They always have inflammation.
Well, and that's the thing. So it shows up differently. Mm-hmm. And for some people, zero sunlight won't cause depression, but it will cause something else. And for some people, zero sunlight causes a depression. It would never, ever be linked to that. It just, if somebody went into their doctor and said that they were feeling depressed, there would never be a link between the fact that that person hasn't had direct sunlight, maybe for an hour and a half over the last 365 days, or, whatever. But that's the reality of it, right? So that's a big one. Zero sunlight. We are created with a circadian rhythm, right? And when we fight that circadian rhythm, right? I mean, there's a lot of research showing people that work night shift. Yeah. They got a lot of potential issues down the road from everything from the brain to their heart to everything. And then it's the same thing. We're meant to get sunlight. A lot of our hormones are triggered during the morning. Different hormones are triggered at nighttime. Sun has an effect. When the sun sets has an effect. When it rises, it has. I mean, that's how we are. We absolutely need sun. And again, we're recording this in the summer, so it's easy to get it up north. Wintertime, not so much. So you have to compensate for that which is taking vitamin D. All right, so let's move on to the second cause, obesity.
Yeah.
Strong correlation again between obesity, and there's a lot of reasons why. You mentioned one, those that are obese tend to have higher levels of inflammation, and inflammation can be anywhere, and it can affect the brain, no question. Obesity affects your microbiome, right?
Yeah. You have a different microbiome.
That's right. If you look at the gut bacteria content of a lean person versus an obese person, they're different, and that can affect the brain. There's so many reasons why that can absolutely have an effect on the brain as well. But again, not everybody who's obese is going to be depressed, and not everybody that's depressed is going to be obese. We understand that we're not simplifying it to that point. We're not ignorant on that point as well. But for some people, if they are overweight, their depression can be directly linked to that.
Well, look at in terms of another hormone that in obesity, and that is usually in men and women, right? Your estrogen levels are going up.
Well, and that's
so
the next
in a
one I was
man's
going to talk
levels
about.
Of testosterone is going down, right?
Yeah, and that's the next one, which is excess estrogen. Which
you were going to talk about it. Okay.
Yeah, you jumped ahead. I
didn't get the memo.
I should give you the list so you don't jump ahead. You went way out of order. That's it. This podcast is done. But yeah, okay, let's talk about that one next, which is excess estrogen. Now, for some people that are obese, they have excess estrogen. But again, some people that have high estrogen levels are not obese, but they got a definite estrogen dominance. It's showing up a different way. Mm-hmm. And you see so many different ways that estrogen dominance shows up in people.
Yeah.
For some, definitely going to affect their brain when they have excess estrogen, and it's going to cause depression.
Yeah, mood, anxiety. And I always say that that's just me, and I believe this to be true, that I rarely ever see a true case of depression where it didn't start first with anxiety. So anxiety usually comes first. That's the first symptom of a depression. If you don't fix that anxiety, and you know what, that's a major issue.
Oh, it's so big
today.
now. And
it's so big, it's incredible. It's an epidemic today.
I think social media has a lot to do with it, to be honest with you. I think if you look at the rates of anxiety and depression, they're definitely increasing rapidly. Why is that? I mean, we're talking about a lot of the reasons why as well.
Yeah, and physiologically we want to.
But I think
pretty well.
I'll tell you, like, social media could be awesome, and it can also be a big time problem because a lot of people, whether they want to admit it or not, are highly addicted to social media. And social media, again, like any other addiction, if you're addicted, it can cause depression. If you're addicted to anything, you could be depressed. Yeah. And social media, I'll tell you, one of the smartest things, one of the strongest drivers in human nature is what they call the fear of missing out, right? That's a powerful, I remember as a kid, remember that Cabbage Patch craziness? Yeah. They were smart. They didn't make enough of them. I mean, how hard is it to make enough Cabbage Patch dolls? They got factories around the world. They could have made it, but they were smart, right? They kept the shortage. And they would say, so people had
scraps.
Fights in all the stores, and they were smart. They put 100, and then they didn't want to miss out. I mean, I got to get a Cabbage Patch doll for my daughter for
Remember
Christmas.
How much they cost? They
were insane. But it's called that fear of missing out. That's a powerful thing. See, social media is smart because the feed is constant. Let's look at Facebook. The feed is constantly refreshing. And I'll tell you, all they have to do is put on the Facebook icon a little red dot saying that you have a notification. And I'll tell you, how long does the average person wait when they get that notification to check it? It controls our lives. Mm-hmm. It controls our lives. I bet you the average time between seeing a notification and checking what it is, I bet you it's so short for most people. We got to know what it is. We can't miss out. There's a notification there. But again, I think we're going to look back in so many years and just understand the effect that it's had on us in general, right? So yeah, that's another one. So we just mentioned too much estrogen. Let's kind of go through these things. Here's another massive one: processed diet. Because I'll tell you, vegetable oils, to borrow a line from Waterboy with Adam Sandler, are the devil, right? Foosball's the devil. Well, vegetable oils are the devil. They're bad for you. They increase inflammation. If you want to make a rat fat for a study, you give it a combination of vegetable oil and bad carbs, and it just fattens that thing up. That's the secret sauce. If you were like, I want to do a study on mice, and I want to look at the effect of a diabetes on a mouse. Well, you got to give the mouse diabetes. So how do they do it?
Our
Fat
diet
and bad carbs. Vegetable oils, the very same things that we eat when we go to a grocery store.
Yeah, your seed oils and all this and that.
They're no good for you. And they were smart because they call them vegetable oils. Like, they're so good for you.
Canola.
Vegetable oils. Vegetables are so good for you. So let's call these vegetable oils. Yeah, canola oils. I mean, so many of them, but they are bad. But they cause inflammation big time, and they also cause a ton of autoimmune disorders. There are a lot of people today, autoimmune disorders are climbing up. And there are a lot of people that get them because of these vegetable oils. But processed diet, make no mistake, a processed diet can directly cause depression.
Yeah.
Now, there's some steps in between, inflammation and change of microbiome and a change of all these things. But eventually, a high processed diet for a long time can lead to depression. But again, not everybody who has a high processed diet is going to get depression. Some will end up with heart disease. Some will end up with an autoimmune disorder. But many will end up with depression. Yeah. So that's another one. Here's another big one as well. Probably one of the biggest, a lack of sleep. For a lot of reasons, right? Our brain, I was reading a study on really all the different steps or phases that you go through and the importance of an REM, how it's like when you go through that REM step sleep and you go in and out of it all the time throughout the night, right? You go through the phases over and over again. It's like a brain dump. It's like when your computer's running slow and you clear the cache or you reboot it. That's what it does to your brain. REM sleep does that to your brain. If you don't get REM sleep, if you're not sleeping properly or getting deep enough sleep, and you can't do that brain dump, it hurts your brain. It hurts your brain. And what's interesting is that a lot of these medications that people take for depression and sleeping doesn't allow.
They keep you out of the REM sleep.
Yes.
They keep you out of that deep sleep.
And
they sedate you.
Yeah, there's a difference between sedation and sleeping.
Yeah.
Right? Sedation and sleeping are two different
things. And you get up
things.
in the morning, you're still exhausted.
Yeah, and you didn't go through that REM, so you didn't have that brain dump. Yeah. And one of the things that happens as well in some of the stages of sleep is it actually encodes your memory into your brain, right? Sleep is an important aspect of memory. Most people don't realize this. But while you're sleeping, it's like your brain is a computer, and it's like now it's hard coding the data into your brain so you don't forget it. But if you don't get sleep and you're not going through the different phases properly, you're not encoding that into your brain, and it could cause some memory issues, and it could definitely cause depression. Plus, a lack of sleep, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, causes fat gain, right? It increases your body fat, increases your estrogen levels, decreases your human growth hormone secretions.
Your cortisol levels.
Increases cortisol. It's on and on and on and on. So sleep is in fact, it'd be interesting to see what percentage of people that are depressed started because what their sleeping habits were like for a long time. But anyways, so sleep's another big one. Here's another one that's really big as well. A lack of movement or exercise. Mm-hmm. I mean, how important is exercise for brain health?
The true vitamin E, right, for your brain. Exercise, right? And almost any exercise is good. And we always talk about the one that lowers your insulin the most.
Well, and that's the last one that we kind of end on, which is high insulin.
We're not going to talk about leaky gut?
Well, see, gut health, every one of these things affects gut health. Yeah. But yes, leaky gut syndrome. Now, again, for a lot of people, leaky gut, we say that and we know they fall asleep for a few seconds because, leaky gut, let's be honest, is not an interesting topic. We get excited about it. We kind of see that as such a cause for so many things.
It's a huge root.
But we understand because for some people, they don't have symptoms, but they do, but they don't associate that with leaky gut, right? Their skin may be a mess because their gut is a mess, but they don't even understand it because they have no digestive symptoms. Yeah. But we understand that. But leaky gut, you're right. And all the things that can cause leaky gut can eventually lead to depression. Yeah. Right? But the last one, because we're out of time here, is just high circulating insulin. And we talk about that on every episode because of the importance.
We're the one-trick pony.
We are. And if you have high circulating insulin, which is a high glycemic, high sugar, or crappy carbs, or high vegetable oil diet, and you have excess insulin circulating all the time, it's going to cause neuroinflammation. It's going to cause brain shrinkage. hippocampus and all that's going to shrink. It's going to affect the
The
connections in your brain.
triglycerides go across the blood-brain barrier.
And it can
Shrinks the brain,
cause
causes
depression.
inflammation, absolutely.
We're 25 minutes in, so we're definitely past time here. You can just take the list that we just gave you, kind of reverse it. If you're not getting sunlight, get sunlight.
Vitamin D.
If you have insulin resistance or too much insulin, lower your insulin.
Yeah. Not only by your food. Our insulin formula, by the way, does tremendous.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that, how good that formula is. And if they go on our website, they can see like some of the testimonials for that. But I get great results with that every day in the office.
Yeah,
I just tell you clinically, that helps you. And insulin, if you can get your insulin down, that helps for everything.
That's kind of, it's funny. I just started taking that one again myself because I was taking it for a while, and then I take so many supplements a day. A lot of the stuff we make it because we take it as well, right? So, but I started taking that again, and
It is good.
yeah, I like it, right? So, but again, what we wanted to do today was just simply talk about all the external causes of depression, so that if you're suffering with depression, look at that list that we just went through and see if any of those things are affecting you, and then work on those things and see what kind of effect it's going to have on your brain. Because one of the things that we hear all the time is how much better people feel. And when you feel better, your brain's better, everything's working better. It's amazing what can happen. And food is a powerful medicine. Food is a powerful antidepressant or a powerful depressant. If you look at everything you eat as either increasing inflammation, is it causing disease or is it healing you?
Yeah. Good or bad.
Good or bad, right?
There's very little neutral food.
No, and people, I understand from a weight loss perspective, some people are like, there's no bad foods, but that's not true. There are some foods that are really bad. They taste fantastic. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't make them, right? There's no question. You combine sugar and fat, I mean, that's gold.
Donuts.
That's gold. I mean, that's a powerful, and it does stuff to our brains. Our brains want that so bad. You combine sugar and fat, our brains just like salivate thinking about that, right? So it's just, I mean, unfortunately, we live in a society today that a lot of things are working against our brain, and a lot of things can then end up leading to depression. But again, we're out of time. So if you have any questions, you can email us at info@martinclinic.com. You can go to our website, martinclinic.com. If you're not a newsletter subscriber, again, we talk about a lot of these studies in our newsletters. Go ahead and join our newsletters. And again, we send a lot of emails. We definitely do. We get excited about health, and we got a lot to say. So we just send out these short emails talking about studies, giving you some practical advice in there as well. So again, we want to thank you for listening, and have a great day.